When I started this channel maybe 10 months ago, it was for a specific reason, and it wasn't anything to do with the esteemed Dr. Peterson. It was to attempt to bring to people's attention the reach and scope of the surveillance state in the West generally, but most particularly in my previously glorious and free country that is known as the United Kingdom. The fact that I made the Jordan Peterson video was a tremendous stroke of luck, in that it put me in front of 500,000 people who had hitherto been ignoring my first few videos. Bastards. I posted that video almost on the spur of the moment, and being a YouTube novice, I was even unaware of what clickbait was. Well, I know now. But what was most important about that video, more important than the 500,000 views, was that it gave me the confidence to carry on. So I'm really appreciative of all the people who watched it and who made positive comments about it. Most of all, of course, I will be indebted to the good doctor himself. Of course, my viewer rate dropped dramatically, as was accurately predicted by a good friend of mine. But although now very modest, it remains stable and is in fact growing a little bit. My focus has drifted somewhat away from my original brief of surveillance, as I was spurred into activity by the horrors of the Telford Muslim rape squads, which itself led on to the arrest and jailing of Tommy Robinson as chief dissident, combating the mainstream media's baffling conspiracy of silence. Mentioning Tommy Robinson in my titles also counts as clickbait, but it has to be said, it is of an order of magnitude somewhat less than Dr. Peterson's. But I do have to get back to basics, to use a hackneyed political slogan, and bring attention back to the spectre of mass surveillance, which, although may not be the biggest issue facing the free societies of the West, it is the single most powerful weapon that the forces of the totalitarian fascism uses to subjugate and control their populations. Brexit really is an earth-shattering event of modern times, far more so even than the election of Donald Trump. It has torn open a gash in the British and European body politic that has been covered over for more than 4 decades. But as earth-shattering as it is, it pales into insignificance when placed next to the ever-increasing power of the surveillance state. A favourite phrase of the Brexiteers is taking our country back, and to many separating ourselves from the European superstate seems like the way to go about that. And it is, but it is only one of many things. At the time of the vote, I was only mildly Brexit, and one of the reasons for that is that much of the legislation that has come out of the EU has favoured the idea of personal freedom and privacy and against the invasion of the state into people's personal lives. There really is a strong libertarian strain in Europe, coming from France in its revolutionary principles, and from Germany, which has relatively recent and first-hand experience of what it means when the state becomes too powerful. I was in France recently, and although there are more cameras there now than when I was last there a few years ago, there is still only a tiny fraction of the number that there are in the UK. So what do I conclude from this? Sadly, it tells me that the French know more about freedom than we do. It tells me that they understand that to be under constant surveillance is not freedom, which is something that we in Britain seem to have forgotten. And in Germany, as I understand it, there are serious legal obstacles to putting up a CCTV camera in the street. In the aftermath of the Berlin Christmas market lorry attack, I heard BBC Radio 2's resident correspondent on police matters smugly criticising the Germans because their streets weren't as saturated with surveillance the way ours are. But because he was a nosy, interfering and authoritarian copper who believes that the general public must be watched at all times because they just obviously can't be trusted, This Bacon seemed to be ignorant of the fact that less than 30 years ago, the East Germans, at least, did have a state apparatus that did its level best to keep watch over the entire population at all times. It was called the Stasi, and it resulted in a cowed and frightened society, forever looking over its shoulder. So pervasive was it that they had workers informing on their colleagues, friends reporting on friends, wives spying on husbands, brothers on sisters, fathers on daughters, and mothers on sons. Fully 1/5 of the East German population was, at least on one occasion, informing on the remaining 80%. So you go out for a night with 4 mates, there's a fair chance that one of them is a state informer. Imagine how corrosive that would be. So the Germans know how lustful the state is for power, for information. We don't. It's not an intellectual position for them. They remember, and they know that constant surveillance does harm to a society, real harm, and they know that putting up a CCTV camera in a public street is a part of that same totalitarian mindset. We, the state, want to watch you, but we don't want you to watch us. That's why CCTV cameras are always on 30-foot poles, protected by barbed wire, so they can have an uninterrupted field of vision. But we can't climb up them and put a bag over the lens. So the Germans remember and formulate their policies accordingly. They know that blanket surveillance is a very, very bad thing. Unfortunately, because we have never lived under that kind of tyranny, although it is coming, we don't know this. And there are many who believe that the cameras are there to protect us, or even more laughably, that they are there to prevent terrorism. So when we chant that we are taking our country back, we'd better be pretty bloody sure who we're then giving it to, because the authoritarians would be delighted to be free of European regulation, and particularly of the kind of European regulation that seeks to ensure the privacy of its citizens. I'm definitely no fan of the European Union, not in the slightest, but there is a strain of libertarianism amongst Europeans, for the reasons I've already mentioned, and is much stronger and more coordinated than it is in Britain. The nanny state looms large in the very DNA of the Labour Party, coming as it does with the philosophy of we know best, common to socialists everywhere. So it's no surprise that the Labour Party has always supported more and more surveillance. But you think that the Conservative Party, being a party, supposedly a party of the right, might follow the same laissez-faire principles to personal liberty as it does to economics? Not a bit of it. After promises to roll back the surveillance state that the previous Labour administration had presided over for the previous 13 years, once in power, they showed that power itself was the raison d'etre of the Conservative Party, just as it had been for Labour. When people disengage from the political discussion, cynically stating that they're all the same, this is what they mean. So although there are differences between the political parties, it's their similarities that we should be concerned with. And the major similarity, more so than all the others put together, is that they desire power. They desire power over and above any other thing that they purport to stand for. A prosperous free market economy, a comprehensive and well-funded welfare state, a benign atmosphere in which entrepreneurs can start businesses, free healthcare for all, a safe society in which one can raise a family, a world-class education system, etc., etc., etc. Any and all of these things may be stated as priorities by either the left or the right, but the real business of government is to be in power, and more exactly, to be in control. Power and control. These are the terrible twins of government, And these are the things that give those in power the biggest hard-ons. And what gives control? What gives power? Information. And how is information acquired? Through surveillance. When Tommy Robinson was arrested, many were talking about an open revolt, talking about taking to the streets in open rebellion, baseball bats and pickaxe handles at the ready. How far would that have got? Probably no further than Westminster Tube train station. Why? Because they'd know we were coming. Through CCTV on the streets, in trains, tubes, trams and buses, through the monitoring of mobile phone networks, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube and the internet, generally they would know. They'd know how many of us there were, where we were going, where we were meeting and where we were heading. And through their surveillance they could head us off at the pass, so to speak, with just enough of their stormtroopers to outnumber us, whilst keeping most of their strength in reserve. In 1972, 30,000 striking miners marched on a coking plant in Birmingham, overwhelming 800 policemen and causing the Chief Constable of Birmingham to shut the plant in the interest of public safety. That set the scene for the miners' strike of the following year, which indirectly brought about the downfall of the Conservative government. And that brought about Margaret Thatcher's determination that the same thing would not happen to her government in the miners' strike of 10 years later. And it didn't. It didn't because she spent 5 years stockpiling coal and then approved millions of pounds of overtime pay for the police force. And then, when she was ready, launched 6,000 police equipped with batons and riot shields and supported by dogs and mounted police against 5,000 unarmed miners corralled in a field from which they could not escape. They called it a battle, and it was. They called it the Battle of Orgreave, and it may be the first time that the police force had been used openly to settle an industrial issue, rather than just enforcing the law, as some may still quaintly imagine to be the police force's role. But they wouldn't have to do that today, partly because there are no coal mines left, no miners, and most importantly from the point of view of those who revere Margaret Thatcher, no national union of mine workers, and precious little other unions too for that matter. But they wouldn't have to do that today, because they wouldn't be surprised by numbers, and so they wouldn't turn up under-resourced. In any case of mass civil unrest, their precious surveillance network would ensure that they would never be outnumbered. They will always be one step ahead. If they know there are 5,000 protesters, they'll be able to deploy 6,000 police or more to meet us. In recent protests, in particular the unofficial, spontaneous Free Tommy demo, they were caught unawares, since it was unofficial and it was spontaneous. Unfortunately for those same reasons, so was I, and I didn't go, probably along with many thousands of others. But thousands did go, and the authorities were wrong-footed, and they could have been overwhelmed. But to what end? If those protesters had breached the gates at Downing Street, I hate to think what might have happened. At the very least, somebody might have got shot. At worst, it might have been the excuse they needed, and a crackdown would have ensued, followed by a curfew, mass arrests, and maybe even the introduction of martial law. Think that sounds far-fetched? Think it wouldn't happen here? Think again. The fascists in government are itching to pull that trigger. So open revolt is not the answer. And how could it ever be? Imagine for a moment that 500 Tommy supporters had managed to get into 10 Downing Street. What would they do? Who knows? Certainly not them, because that would be revolution for revolution's sake. They might manage to set the place on fire before the army turned up, but they wouldn't have the first clue how to run the world's 6th largest economy with a population of 65 million people. Who would? I mean, that would be as bad as invading a country and not having a plan on what to do next. And what moron would do that? Oh yeah. Last Wednesday, a great wrong was put right when chief nuisance and official pain in the arse Tommy Robinson was released from his illegal imprisonment. And that's significant, not least for him. But it is significant in what it reveals. It reveals firstly, as we all suspected, that Tommy was specifically and unfairly targeted by the British state, making him by definition a political prisoner. Secondly, it reveals that given enough support and enough will, the British rule of law can still up to its promise and deliver real justice. And thirdly, it reveals that the British state has misjudged the mood of the nation. When they imprisoned Robinson, they believed they were making a popular move. They believed that they had successfully used the law to silence and maybe even to conveniently finish off who they thought was a universally despised racist thug. Well, they were wrong. Despite what all the media outlets have been saying about him for years, the British public, by and large, weren't having any of it. So pressure was exerted. The authorities were made to see the error of their ways. Their shotgun justice was revealed to be the kangaroo court that it really was, and they were forced to release him, whilst using the law in the form of appeal as a fig leaf to cover their corruption and their hypocrisy. The financial support that was made available to argue Tommy's case was a significant factor, as was the massive visual public support, as well as the virtual support he received online. That will have given them pause for thought. Many in the so-called mainstream will have been shocked by the level of his support. Hopefully, there will be many in the mainstream who may, like I did, begin to question the official and utterly simplistic narrative of the violent, hateful, racist thug, and begin to question whether or not it is true. And that is all that's needed. To question, to investigate, to use one's eyes and ears and one's critical faculties, and to give the man a chance, and, at least for argument's sake, to take him at his word. And once you crack open that crack in people's received worldview, so long as they are rational and logical, they will come over to our side. So that's why we don't need revolution. We need to continue to take to the streets for sure to maintain the pressure. But we don't need to storm the palace gates. The Palace of Westminster, that is. We are winning the arguments. We really are. The hearts and minds are ours for the taking. In one of my previous videos, I said that we could win this war. We can. We are, and we shall. And Tommy's release is but the first victory in a long series of battles that are yet to come. But those in power are not going to take it lying down. I have noticed even in the last week that they have upped their game. When I say they have upped their game, I'm really damning them with very faint praise, since up until now the very pinnacle of the sophistication of their arguments has been to call their opponents racists, fascists, or when all else fails, Nazis. Well, their tiny minds are beginning to realise that that just isn't working anymore, and so they are beginning, with great reluctance it seems, to try to employ actual, rational and cogent arguments to support their vapid values. And this should be fun, watching them flail around, trying to build solid positions on the wishy-washy foundations of the evil racist patriarchy. Think the Remainers trying to deliver a soft, meaningless Brexit without anybody noticing. and then multiply that by 10. But whilst those deluded, but perhaps well-meaning fools are doing that and actually engaging in the battle of ideas, the real fascists in their ranks know that when it comes to reason, they can't win. They know that they won't win. And so what will they do? Well, since they have singularly failed to shut down debate by shouting racist, they will attempt to shut down debate by technologically and legally shutting down the debate. And they've tried this already by trying to introduce Articles 11 and 13 of the Copyright Directive into European law, which includes Britain, by the way, since we're not out yet, which would have forced providers, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, etc., to be responsible for any content uploaded. This was a clumsy but nevertheless veiled attempt to remove unpopular to the prevailing narrative at any rate, to remove unpopular opinions and to censor the internet at source. It was defeated, but don't imagine they won't try again, and the next attempt will be less clumsy, more stealthy and more sophisticated. Because it was the rapid spread of information about Robinson's arrest that made his eventual release possible. Because we weren't all relying on the BBC and the Guardian telling us how horrible and racist Tommy was, we were able to use the internet in the way that it was intended by Tim Berners-Lee, to enable the free and unrestricted exchange of ideas. And that's powerful. If it wasn't for the internet, Tommy would still be being beaten up and arrested every weekend in Luton. Sure, he flew too close to the sun, but what damned him also freed him. But of course it's powerful to the wrong people. It's powerful to us. And to those actually in power, that is not acceptable, because they're supposed to be powerful, not us. We're just serfs. We're supposed to just work and buy stuff and get in debt and watch Love Island like morons and do what we're fucking told. They're supposed to be the ones with power. And so this freely accessible internet just can't be allowed to stand. Because these people, us, we're making our own minds up. We were sifting through all the myriad different sources, some reliable, some not, and coming up with our own conclusions about what is true and what's not. And what we concluded, en masse, was that we were being lied to, that at the very least, Tommy was not the evil, hate-spewing Nazi after all. We concluded that he was an impassioned bloke with sometimes clumsy language who actually had a point. And it was a point that was being ignored, and that willful ignorance and denial had a devastating result, namely the industrial scale gang rape of countless thousands of vulnerable, and not to say completely innocent and blameless children and young women. And for what? So Muslims don't get their feelings hurt. So the internet has become a problem for those who seek to dominate and control us, because it's too wild, it's too slippery, and it's too uncomfortable, and it's too uncontrollable. But for them, for the government and for the group of utterly pathetic peeping toms known as General Communications Headquarters or GCHQ, it also presents an opportunity. If they can get their nosy hooters far enough into the system to be able to intercept our communications, they will be able to know what we are saying before it even reaches those with whom we are communicating. If I text or email Frank about where I'm meeting him, GCHQ knows before Frank does. Now the thing is, they weren't allowed to do that. But because of Edward Snowden, who I regard as perhaps even more courageous than Tommy Robinson, we now know that they were doing that. He exposed them as having been breaking the law. So what did they do? They changed the law. or rather our current Prime Minister, when she was Home Secretary, introduced the Investigatory Powers Act of 2016, unofficially and more correctly known as the Snoopers Charter. She changed the law. So now that they are allowed to do that. See how that works? And I'm still waiting for the criminal charges to be brought against all those government spooks who were repeatedly breaking the law. I won't be holding my breath though. So the internet has been a problem for them, but they are turning it to their advantage by using all the tools in their arsenal to make it work for them and against us. The surveillance of the internet and the virtual world is one of their strategies. Clamping down on inconvenient opinions through hate speech laws is another. But the surveillance of the real world, of public space, is yet another. The surveillance net is almost complete in the United Kingdom. The interaction of street CCTV with automatic number plate recognition, which can and does monitor law-abiding motorists in real time, together with things like Oyster cards, which people use on public transport, as well as the myriad CCTV systems on buses, tubes, trams and trains, to say nothing of the information that we blithely hand over in the form of our mobile phone signals, all contribute to an all-powerful, all-knowing and all-seeing eye, which is designed to remove all surveillance black spots so that they know where everyone is at all time, all across the country. There will be no privacy. There will be no such thing as a private life. Everywhere you go, every person you meet, without your knowledge or your permission, will be known. There will be no escape. There are many ways in which we can be free, or not free. To be able to speak one's mind is, in my opinion, the most important freedom we have. It's a freedom which underpins all of the others. So when they start restricting it by introducing hate speech laws, we should not only be very, very worried indeed, we should start looking around us to see what other freedoms have been compromised or removed altogether. Because if they've begun to attack our freedom of speech, then it's likely that other, perhaps less cherished freedoms have already been conquered. Like freedom of movement, for instance. Most people don't notice CCTV cameras and have just accepted them as part of the furniture of everyday living. If they notice them at all, it is often to utilise them to solve a problem that they may have. Who stole my car? Check the CCTV. Who was it who threw that brick through my window? Check the CCTV. I've just received a parking ticket I didn't deserve. Check the CCTV. And for these things they are undoubtedly extremely useful. But by accepting their presence, we are accepting their dominion over us. We are accepting that it is all right for us to be under the watchful eye of the state. Why? Why is it acceptable for them to watch me when I am unable to do the same? Why? Why do we accept this? Because if you do accept it, what does it say about you? Does it say that you're a strong, morally upright, trustworthy, fearless and confident law-abiding member of society? I don't think it does. I think it says something else. In fact, I think it says one of two things about you. One is quite shameful, and the other, well, that's really shameful. The quite shameful thing it says about you is that you are not to be trusted. It says that unless there is a camera trained on you, you will revert to being a litterbug, a vandal, a thief, a violent thug, a rapist, a murderer, a terrorist or a paedophile. That's one of the options. And remember, that's the better of the two. The other thing it says, the really shameful thing, is that you are a spineless pussy. How so, you might ask? Well, by accepting the notion that you are under the protective gaze of the state. That says that you are nothing more than a cowed and quivering wreck. It says that despite the fact that the United Kingdom is one of the safest and most peaceful societies on earth, you are still too terrified to go out in public without someone watching over you, without your mummy or your big brother. I mean, how fucking pathetic can you get? Now, I know that's not who we are, but that's how we are viewed by those in power. Either we are criminals in waiting, or we're babies. In a way, that's the whole philosophy, as Peterson would say, of the oppressors and the oppressed, wrapped up in the technology of surveillance. The criminals in waiting are broadly the Tommy Robinson supporters, but it will rapidly expand to include all white males. And the oppressed, the babies, well, that's everybody else. So which are you? A criminal in waiting? Or a baby? Or are you something else? Are you a free citizen? Because if you are, this doesn't stop with Tommy's release. This is only the beginning. Let's overwhelm them.